Welcome in, everyone. This is Picks and Parlays, Bettors Edge. I'm the host, Hannah Mears. We've got Andrew Fillipponi from FanDuel More Ways to Win. And we've got Craig Trapp, the very own man of Picks and Parlays himself. Guys, NFL season is finally here. I couldn't be more excited. And to finally be here speaking with two of the best sports betting analysts, in my opinion, that I've ever worked with, I'm excited to look ahead and to see what the NFL futures we have for everyone are going to pan out to be. And when we look at NFL futures, one of the most popular futures and the easiest one, the one that everybody wants to look at, is teams over. We want to see what teams you're high on this season. So tell me, Pony, we'll start with you. What team are you high on? What team's going to hit their over this NFL season?
Well, I'm an against the grain guy. You're going to discover that about me, Craig. I can sometimes be a contrarian, both in my opinions and my betting philosophy. I like the Rams over 6.5 wins. And the consensus seems to be that this team's going to bottom out, that they hit their stride. They won a Super Bowl. They had to sell their soul and got rid of everything to do it. And last year was just bad luck. I mean, horrible luck. The offensive line was different every single week. Cooper Kupp got hurt. Matt Stafford started the season injured. And 6.5 is so low in an NFC where, frankly, there's not a lot of good teams. So I'm going to start the season with this foundation with the Rams. I've got a Super Bowl winning coach. I've got Aaron Donald, one of the best defensive players of all time, healthy. I've got Cooper Kupp coming back from his injury. I've got Matt Stafford at 35, I think still an upper echelon quarterback. And I've got an offensive line that can't suffer the string of bad luck, where they never had the same starting combination in back-to-back weeks all season long. 6.5 is so low. You've got 2 automatic wins against Arizona. 6.5. They're going to be at least a 7-win team, guys. I think they're a dark horse to make the playoffs and even win a playoff game. I'm not counting out this team with the same nucleus that they won a Super Bowl with.
Even after all of the Matthew Stafford stuff and everybody coming out and saying he's having a hard time connecting with his team, you're still high on the Rams.
I am. I mean, the Cooper Kupp Matt Stafford thing 2 years ago, that was the most lethal combination in the entire NFL.
Magic.
Yeah.
Right?
What the question with that team is, or in that division, is Seattle. Is Seattle what they were last year? Are they going to, I think of that's,
right.
I don't think you either play Seattle over or the Rams over.
And they're a top-heavy team. I mean, if they suffer injuries to the guys that I just mentioned, their top handful of players, they're screwed because they've traded their draft picks. They didn't have money to spend in free agency. I don't think losing Jalen Ramsey is the biggest loss. To me, he was a boom or bust player the last few years. So
I think it's going to come down to McVay and how good of a chemist he can be with what he has, because he only has the elements to work with that are in his hands. He can't do too much outside of that. Craig, when you're looking at a team, you're saying, I'm really high on them. Who is it and why?
I'm in LA as well, but I'm on the opposite side. I'm in the AFC. I like the Chargers. To me, the Chargers are a team I've been out on the last few years. And this year, I'm fine. They paid, Herbert. I think now he doesn't maybe have to go out and be the hero ball. I think he can play within himself a little more. And I mean, everybody keeps waiting for the Chiefs to, take a step back.
Yeah.
Is this the year? I mean, I still think they're going to win double-digit games. But, for the Chargers to get this 9.5, you're going to need to probably beat the Chiefs or sweep everybody else in the division, which the Broncos, I just don't know what to expect of the Broncos. They could be great or they could be terrible. Like we saw that last year, and I don't know if coaching matters as much as people think. To me, I think it's an over on Justin Herbert. I think they have a great running game. They have depth everywhere. And then the defense, they have stars on defense. It's just they got to stay healthy, and it seems like they end up in a lot of shootouts. Maybe if the defense just stepped up a little bit and took a little pressure off of that offense, I think this team could be 10, 11, 12 wins. That's how talented that they are now. Can they perform?
I like the Kellen Moore move. Yeah. I think the offensive coordinator change there is big. Yep. Lombardi wanted to make Herbert kind of throw short routes. Right. I mean, they were not really pushing the ball downfield, which is insane, given the guy's arm strength and accuracy. Yeah, and now they've invested in him. So I think that's a positive, even though it's a transition with a new system, you would think. They've got to get better injury luck. They always seem smitten. The Chargers always seem to have something spring up and bite them. Kansas City has hit the over every single year Andy Reid has been their head coach. I heard that stat the other day. It blew my mind. You'd think the odds makers would adjust to that and inflate the number. And I think this is the year. Kansas City still will be great, but I think they might maybe record-wise come back to the pack a little bit. I think LA is, at worst, the second best team in that division.
Well, the Chiefs always have good injury luck. Like, they haven't had that injury problems, And
they were one of the healthiest teams in the NFL last year. That's right. One of the 5 healthiest.
Chiefs and the Eagles, and you saw how far both of them
if
went and what their success was.
if you can keep your healthy quarterback and, like with your key 5 or 6 players, if they play most of your games, you're probably going to win.
And don't get me wrong, the Chargers still performed well despite Herbert was the reason for that being hurt was not ideal. And I think I gave you, even earlier, I kept talking about the Chargers as well. So I think we're both on that with the over. I'm going to go ahead and look at a division win total in this one. And because it's a team that I want to talk about, the Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to take the Atlanta Falcons over 3.5 division wins. I know that's not a lot, but that might be a lot to ask of a team like the Atlanta Falcons when we know the struggles that they've had. This is sitting at a little bit of plus money value. When you look at a division like the NFC South, you've got a team with the Buccaneers led by Baker Mayfield. And I don't think he's their ideal quarterback they want for a long time. I think he's their best option at the moment. I think a team like the Panthers are going to have a lot of growing pains, and they're already hitting a little bit of an injury bug, even with the preseason, with some key guys like a running back like Miles Sanders that they brought in. And then you look at a team like the Saints. This is probably going to be the best team in the NFC South, and I like what they're able to do. I think they showed really good glimpses of greatness last year. But I don't think it's too far out of the realm to say that the Atlanta Falcons aren't that at least number 2 team in that division and go over 3.5 division wins, especially when you look at a guy like Bijan Robinson that they brought in. And then the defense got better under a new coordinator. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Atlanta Falcons over 3.5 division wins.
Well, this is... Hannah thinks she's saying something that's outlandish and bold. It's not, because the odds makers like Atlanta. Their win total is 8.5. All of the analytics people think that they are kind of this under-the-radar dark horse team because they were in so many one-score games last year. Yeah. And there's a curiosity factor with Adden Robinson at running back, like you said, Hannah. And you've got Arthur Smith, who's a good mind offensively. So Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. Yep. They're the first team in NFL history to have a top 10 pick at running back, wide receiver, and tight end in their offense. So in the division they're in, I've got questions about Ritter. I mean, that's the thing that, to me, when the analytics people say they're going to win double-digit games and you're picking them to win 4 division games, I'm not sold on the quarterback. Craig, you're an Ohio guy. You saw him a lot in college.
I'm a Cincinnati guy. So, Ritter, most wins ever at home of any quarterback ever in college. So, I mean, this guy gets it done. He's not the flashiest guy. You're right. Doesn't have the biggest arm. Pretty good decision maker. Great leader. Which a young team.
But he's not in Kansas or Cincinnati anymore. Right. This is the NFL now we're talking.
The question to me is how good Carolina is. That's the team. I'm not a big New Orleans fan. I think they're just overrated. I think Tampa's going to be absolutely terrible. So I think you could sweep there. So hey, if they get one at Carolina, one at, they split with New Orleans, there you get your 4 wins. Now, when you start talking about over win totals as far as the season, I don't know. Atlanta.
Which is why I stayed away from that, mind you. Right. I like Atlanta in their division because their division is probably one of the weakest in the league. And that is why I looked specifically at that division win total, because you can still get plus money value. But yeah, as for the total, that's a whole nother story, because I think that's where the quarterback comes into play when you're facing a lot of these stronger teams.
Yeah, all 4 teams are in transition except maybe New Orleans. But even in that case, it's Derek Carr coming in.
It's still somebody new.
Right. He's got
still somebody new, and there's still really big uncertainties with that team.
He's got a familiarity with the coach there from being with him with the Raiders, Allen. But, Atlanta, they didn't do anything in the preseason. They rested everybody. I think it's because Smith didn't want to put anything on tape because he's going to get really creative with their offense. No. I think there's going to be times where they have 3 running backs on the field at the same time.
Well, they were the biggest running team last year.
Right.
And you added
And why would that change? It's actually, in my opinion, a stupid pick. Yeah. Because you already had Cordell Patterson and Algier there. Yeah. You probably should have helped your team someplace else, but they didn't. It's an embarrassment of riches at running back. Atlanta, I was out on, Hannah, but the more I've read about them, I think you actually might be onto something.
The question is, what if Ritter doesn't work out?
Then they go to Heineke.
Maybe.
That's
Go to
fine,
Heineke.
but in
That
the
worked in
division,
Washington. I just
in the
don't know.
division, when we're just
Right.
looking at the division,
Right.
I think he'll work out enough to get those over 3.5 wins. Now, long term, I think Atlanta will
was
have
it
to
last
address
year?
quarterback issues.
Was it Carolina and Tampa last week of the season? Those were the two teams that
Right.
were.
Yes,
whoever,
because Carolina started to come on a little
Right.
bit. Their quarterback situation looked better. Tampa, their offense was catching
Right.
up a little bit with their defense, but what we know coming into this season, neither of those teams are a sure bet. But when we're talking about teams we aren't sure about, it's time to turn to the under of things here. So
Yeah.
NFL teams that you don't think are going to pan out this season. I'm going to start this one, and I'm going to start this one because last year I was so high on Russell Wilson going to the Broncos. I really thought Russell Wilson was going to be the guy to lift the Broncos to glory and pair with their amazing defense that they do have. And by the way, their defense was still great last year. But I'm going to say the Broncos under 7.5 wins because I physically cannot put myself through the pain of riding with Russell Wilson yet again. Despite Sean Payton being there, I don't think Sean Payton's going to be a wizard enough to walk into Denver, wave a magic wand, and all of a sudden they're an 8-9 win team. I just don't see it happening. Under 7.5, they could maybe be a 7-win team, best case scenario, in my opinion. But for a team that only averaged 16 points per game last year, I'm not high on the fact that Sean Payton's going to make some drastic change and make this happen. And if we know anything, especially being from Pittsburgh, you have to put points on the board no matter how good your defense is in order to be successful and to have longevity into the playoffs. Here's something interesting that I saw on the X sphere, the Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days.
Yeah.
There was a point last year the Broncos held opponents to 17 or fewer points in regulation 10 times. They were 3-7 in those games. Their defense was not the problem. Their defense still won't be the problem. Russell Wilson and this offense will still be the problem long term. I'm not high on the Broncos under 7.5 wins.
I thought Sean Payton, when he made those comments to USA Today that got him in all that trouble, talking about the worst coaching job of all time with Nathaniel Hackett there.
He wasn't wrong.
Right. The guy didn't even make it through
He wasn't wrong, but it's not
didn't
right to
even make
say
it through
before you've done
double
something.
season.
Before you've done
But not
anything.
wrong.
But I think the method to the madness there was he was trying to, I think, set the expectation that Rome wasn't built in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And when the head coach comes out and says, we have low expectations for ourselves, why should I, as a bettor, feel any different? You know, it's one thing if somebody on the outside sets that narrative with the team, but the person that's literally the captain of the ship is saying it. So I think maybe Sean Payton in his mind is thinking undersell, over-deliver. But where they put the number, I don't. I think the defense too, Craig, like it's a new coordinator.
Right.
So to expect that they're going to get the same results as they did last year, I think is a stretch.
Well, they also played very conservative on offense last year. So it kind of protected the defense a little bit. They ran the ball. They tried to, run the clock. That's not Sean Payton's style. He's going to want to push the ball and do a little more. That could set the defense up to some bad situations because we know what hurt them last year was turnovers. And Russell Wilson was, and the offensive line were the big problem. Well, they also, had running backs.
Still the problem. And I think that's why Sean Payton made those comments.
Yeah.
Take some of that pressure off Russell Wilson. But with a veteran guy like Wilson, a guy that can lead teams to Super Bowls, you shouldn't have to take that pressure off of him. He should be ready to rise to the occasion and put that on his back. That was what he was brought there to do. So that's my under team. That's a team that I physically cannot, for my sanity, get behind this year. Craig, when you're looking at a team that you're saying isn't going to perform, they're going to underperform this year, who's it going to be?
I love teams, when I'm playing unders, that the public is all over.
Yep.
That is the Detroit Lions. I think Hard Knocks for good, bad, or indifferent. For bettors, I think it's like, the public gets behind the Hard Knocks teams. You fall in love with the stories. I mean, who doesn't like Dan Campbell? Mm-hmm. But what that does is moves the numbers. They have to inflate these numbers. This number probably should be 8.5. Yes, they're in a winnable division. That's like, yes, Aaron Rodgers left, and the Packers are no longer probably the favorite to win that division. I guess they're still probably the favorite, or right there. But I don't think Detroit Lions are ready to take that. I don't think you're getting double digits, even with 17 games now. I think this team is at best, and 9-8 might get them in the playoffs in the NFC. So to me, I'm playing the under on this team. I still think Jared Goff. Do you love Jared Goff? I like the story that, he get traded away. Maybe he could, make a comeback of his career. I think Detroit's probably, happy with what he did last year, but I just don't think he's a 10-win quarterback. So I'm playing the under. I still think that defense is questionable. They've made a lot of additions the last few years in the draft, but they still gave up a gazillion points. They still score quickly, and they leave their defense on the field a lot. So to me, and last year, I thought they were a pretty healthy team. Usually you don't get that 2 years in a row.
I don't like him either. I thought they made what I would consider vanity picks in the draft.
Yep.
They acted in the draft like they were Kansas City and had already won a Super Bowl. They picked a running back with their first pick, and they took an inside linebacker with their second pick. We've seen it over the time. Yep. You don't win consistently when you're making those types of short-sighted decisions and you're drafting. Jared Goff, to me, is a quarterback that we've seen will have a great year, and then he'll follow it up with a bad year. And that's why the Rams...
Or good game, bad game.
Yeah, and he's got small hands, and he fumbles in cold weather, even though they play their games in a dome. It's all true. But so to me, why would I buy high on a guy who's coming off, not a career year, because he did that in L.A. with McVay, but coming off close to that? They were ready to give... Basically, they were going into last year thinking, we'll just sit with Jared Goff for one more year, and we'll move on to another quarterback. Right. He proved them wrong. He proved us wrong. The Lions have to prove it to me before, I believe.
He's not a top 10 quarterback. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. He played like one last year, but he's not that type of player.
To get 10 wins in this league, I guess you could say there's people that have done it with their defense. That defense is not a 10-win defense.
No, it's not.
So it would have to be on him.
There's a bit of a fine line between confidence and arrogance. We talk about that, and sometimes when you look at a team like the Lions and the confidence that they have in themselves, it's borderline arrogance, especially when you look at the draft about where they feel like they are, whereas realistically, they actually could be, Pony, a team that you think is going to underperform, though, outside of the Detroit Lions, outside of the Denver Broncos.
Yeah.
Surprise us here. Who's it going to be?
The Bills won 13 games last year. So when the win totals came out and I saw 10.5, okay, that's a big drop-off. Okay, we know the AFC East is competitive with Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets, but 10.5, all they got to do is win 11 games. I like the under. They have not made, in my opinion, the type of moves that teams that are right on the cusp of needing to win a championship do to put themselves over the top. Dalton Kincaid they bring in. He's not a proven number 2 wide receiver. Diggs put up amazing numbers, but there's not that guy. There's not that plan B or number 2 option. Gabe Davis had a very underachieving season last year. The offensive line, I think, is in shambles. I think the 2 tackles there, Dawkins seems like he's regressed. The right tackle, Brown, is awful. Defensively, they're counting on guys who were good 2 or 3 years ago to return to that form. With a new defensive coordinator, McDermott's going to call the plays. Because Leslie Frazier, why would you take a sabbatical and leave a team that's that close to winning a Super Bowl? I think that's off. Yeah. That's a red flag to me. So guys like White and Hyde and Poyer and Von Miller, who knows when he plays. Josh Allen, elbow injury. I don't know, guys. Like the vibe is off to me about the Bills. I would not be surprised, actually, if in a loaded conference they missed the playoffs outright.
We will be talking about the Bills here shortly with something that I have to say later. So we'll save some of the other Josh Allen talk. But we're going to tease. But when we're talking about the AFC, there's going to be only one winner. And this is a loaded AFC this year. These teams probably have way better foundations than a lot of the teams we can see in the NFC. These are going to be the teams to beat. When you're looking at a team to win the AFC outright, what's the one team that stands out to you, Pony?
I like Jacksonville, and it's part and parcel with the fact that the AFC South is an extremely weak division. We know that Houston and Indianapolis are going to play rookie quarterbacks. Tennessee, are they going to make a quarterback change in season? I don't think it's going to take much to bench Ryan Tannehill because they want to see what they have in Will Levis and Malik Willis. So you've got 3 out of the 4 teams there that are looking beyond this year. That means to me, you've got a really good chance for double-digit wins with Jacksonville, at least one home playoff game, maybe more. It's possible, Craig likes the Chargers, that Jacksonville would even get the 1 seed and get a bye through the wild card round. And those teams typically have the best chance of winning the Super Bowl. It's also, they started from ground zero with the Urban Meyer thing, which was such a disaster.
Terrible.
And it took about a half season, I think, for it to click with Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence, and we saw how much better he got as the season went on. Now you throw Calvin Ridley into the mix. The offensive line does scare me. I do think they've got players on defense that just have not gelled yet and come together, and I think organically that'll happen this year. So, hey, I'm always looking for a team that's a little bit – they're not a total shocker because they've got a great ascending quarterback, but I'm not going to go chalk. I think Jacksonville's in that next tier down. I give them a shot.
The win in the playoffs last year, that come from behind win, carries over a little bit. I mean, that confidence when you're down that much, I mean, it was over. The season was over for them, and all of a sudden they win that game. I mean, that can carry over to next year on a young team like that. I think that's a good pick, especially in a bad division. The South AFC South, NFC South, terrible this year. Tennessee would be the only, I think, threat. I mean,
and I think Tennessee could trade Derrick Henry in season.
I don't think that's
Carolina
far off.
traded Christian McCaffrey last year.
I think a lot of us thought Derrick Henry was going to be gone preseason, and he's still here. So I don't think that's far off. I could see Tennessee with the total rebuild and relying on a young quarterback. But yeah, when it comes to Jacksonville, I was going to reiterate that they had that last stretch of the season where they really could carry over, and I think that does a lot. I think the most important factor and who that benefited the most was Trevor Lawrence. And I think that's going to be their biggest reason why they could have success this season. Another team that had a hot start to the end of their season was the Pittsburgh Steelers. I will go ahead and double down on everything that I've been saying with the Steelers. Now, if the Steelers crash and burn, I will be crashing and burning with them because of how high I've been on them. And this was even before the preseason. I made a statement saying, before the first preseason game, keep this in mind, I made a statement saying that the Steelers could go 9-0 to start the season. And that is a very real possibility when you look at the amount of young quarterbacks that they're going to play. And when you look at the strength of their schedule, taking a step back from what it's been in seasons past. I think that the Steelers are coming in with, obviously we know, Kenny Pickett as an amazing quarterback stepping in here, finally the leadership they need. I don't think it's far off to look at those 30-1 odds and say the Pittsburgh Steelers very well could be the AFC champions. I think if TJ Watt doesn't get hurt last year, they're already a playoff team. And then on top of that, the biggest X factor, I think, for the Steelers this year is the depth that they've added with a ton of veteran presence. They have a lot of those young guys like a Joey Porter Jr. that they've paired perfectly with a Patrick Peterson to make sure that he's developing properly. You've got guys developing at the offensive line. You've also paired them with some veterans coming in. You've got a really good depth tandem going on there and really good learning process where Tomlin doesn't have to be the one to just preach things. They could be practicing what they preach on the field next to a guy beside them. I think that's going to be huge for them. On top of that, we then go and see the emphasis and the exclamation point they put on with that amazing preseason performance from their ones on the field. When you look at a guy like Pickens constantly improving, Deontay Johnson, they've got one heck of a tight end room as well. And then you go on the defensive side of the things. They were a top 10 defense last year, even without TJ Watt, which I think is important to note. So shoot the Renegade into my veins. Give Calvin Austin the ball on punt return. Put yourself in good field position and the Steelers to win the AFC.
I am shocked that you're nodding yes over here, Craig.
Homer pick a little bit.
But you were nodding along with her, which
a homer pick, but 30-1 odds.
Well,
How can I not look at that and say this is a definite possibility? There's also the Steelers to make the playoffs plus money value. So many people are fading the Steelers right now because they think it's too good to be true.
That's the problem, is the AFC so good. Just say the West. Probably the Chargers and Chiefs. One's going to win the division, the other one's probably going to be the wild card because the rest of the division's terrible. The East is really tough, so you possibly only get one wild card there. So that leaves one wild card. You got the Bengals, the Ravens, the Steelers. I don't believe in the Browns. So do you pick two out there? So they're going to have to be the top two in the North.
We have to move on to another AFC team. Craig, you haven't given your pick yet. We're talking about Jacksonville. We're talking about Pittsburgh. Another AFC team that you think could finish on top this season.
Well, to me, when I'm looking at the AFC, because it's so deep and competitive, like we just said, I'm looking at double-digit odds teams. Well, a little opposite when we talk about the NFC because it's not as deep. So I'm looking at a favorite there. But when you look at the AFC, I think you have to go double digits. I think the most obvious team outside of, I think, Cincinnati and Kansas City are clearly. Then if you threw Buffalo in as, hey, at least they would be in the talk that they could get to the Super Bowl. I think you have to go to the Chargers. I just think they have everything. They have all the stars on defense you'd want. They have they've paid their quarterback. They've got a great running game. And if they just stay healthy. So I'm going to take the Chargers here. We already talked about them a little bit on the win total over. Same sort of reasoning. I would say the one thing I worry about the Chargers, and I don't worry about with when you have a Mike Tomlin, is coaching. 2 years ago, remember, he went for it on every fourth down. And then last year it was he kind of reversed course. It's to me, I was either go all in on that, go for it all the time, or don't. But to me, it's do you have confidence in that? So coaching there is a question.
And when we're looking at winners in the NFC, we talked a lot about the AFC, and that's because it's so fun to talk about. I want to know who you're high on in the NFC quickly about a team that you think is going to walk away with the NFC title.
Simple. 49ers, they're the best franchise. I mean, other than the Trey Lance decision. I mean, obviously that did not work out, but it hasn't hurt them. I mean, usually if you miss on a quarterback, it's death to your franchise. But the talent level on that team, I mean, they're 4 deep at running back. They're 4 deep at receiver. They have 2 good tight ends, good offensive line, great defense, and the NFC's I think half the teams in the AFC could win the NFC. If that's like how good the AFC is this year. I just don't think there's any. I think it's the Eagles and the 49ers. I think this year the 49ers stay healthier. Last year we talked about the Eagles were very, very healthy. I think usually you don't get that 2 years in a row. I think the 49ers will be healthier this year. I think their quarterback room is good now. You got rid of Trey Lance. You got rid of that issue. And I think their offense is just going to be, and defense going to be amazing. So I'm going to unfortunately go with the chalk, or, I think it's basically a pick 'em between the Eagles and the 49ers.
I hate the 49ers this year. I'm so far out on them.
That's going to get interesting.
I've never seen – the only thing that's a little bit comparable to me is when Tom Brady went in for Drew Bledsoe, and you had a 6th-round unproven quarterback, and Belichick, when Bledsoe got healthy, was like, nah, we're going to keep playing
We're good.
the second-year guy over the $100 million quarterback. But at least Bledsoe had taken a team to the Super Bowl.
Right.
And had been a Pro Bowler. Trey Lance got 1.5 starts last year. He started the Bears game in a monsoon, and then he broke his leg against Arizona in week 2. And they decided, while he was rehabbing, that he wasn't good enough to play quarterback anymore for them. And I say that because they didn't even think he was good enough to back up Brock Purdy. They like Sam Darnold more. Purdy's second half of the season was outstanding, but he was Mr. Irrelevant. I just have a hard time believing that he's going to have that carryover success, even in that great system with their weapons.
So then who are you high on in the NFC if you're not high on the
Niners?
Niners?
I think Craig's overall view from 30,000 feet up is right. It's not a good conference. It's definitely the watered-down league, so I'm going to just throw a dart. I'm going to take the Bears, and I'm going to take Chicago, even though they had the number 1 pick in the draft and were the worst team in the NFL last year, because I think Fields is another one of these quarterbacks that's primed to take that huge leap second year in a system. They bring in DJ Moore in that Carolina trade too. The line will be better with the Darnell Wright pick and Nate Davis coming over from Tennessee. Mooney's a 2 receiver now, Kmet at tight end. They signed Tremaine Edmonds on defense, so they've spent money to shore up that side of the ball to replace Roquan Smith after that trade. I think the division they're in is wide open. I think Fields can have a Lamar Jackson MVP type year where he goes for over 1,000 rushing yards and starts to put it together as a quarterback.
I will say Justin Fields ended up being my fantasy quarterback, and at points in that season, he was the reason I was winning games. He was insane, and when he is good, he's really good. So I kind of like the Chicago Bears there. I'll go ahead, and because the NFC, I know I could probably have made a case for the Seahawks if we're really going to talk about it, but I am not as high about Geno Smith as everybody else is. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's a game-changing franchise Super Bowl winning type of quarterback. I'll take the Eagles as the best odds here. As my pick in the NFC to win. They're coming in with the best foundation of any NFL team right now. The Eagles have returned 9 starters on offense. You have a top 5 quarterback in Jalen Hurts, a guy who goes out there and goes about his business in the right way. You don't see him too much in the media. You don't see him talked about a lot like a Joe Burrow and a Mahomes in a really flashy way. You sort of just see him out on the field doing his job, and I really like that about Jalen Hurts and the way that he carries himself. Not to mention that they have a fairly weak schedule and a bye week in week 10 heading into Kansas City before they head into a gauntlet. So I think this is a team that everything is going in their favor, and I think they're going to start a leg up on a lot of these other teams in the NFC. For maybe this could be the last year or two that they really do, because we are seeing some of these NFC teams start to rebuild, and I think they'll be in more serious contention later down the road when we talk about future years. I think it's sort of now or never for the Eagles when it comes to a Super Bowl. They have a year or two of really talented guys, Devonta Smith, and you look at A.J. Brown having that chemistry with Jalen Hurts. So I'll go ahead and stay high on the Eagles, take them to win the NFC.
Well, I think the question with the Eagles is the health. Like I said, last year, there was a very, very healthy team. Usually you don't get that 2 years in a row. They also did lose some depth on defense. And the Cowboys, I think, are the obvious, like that's, and Washington. I would think Washington, I think, is going to have a big improvement this year. I really think Washington, I just think the issues in the front office and ownership, I think it really does affect, players, and it, trickles down. You finally got rid of that cancer. I think they're going to have – now, they're going to win 12 games? No. But if they win 9 games, those got to come from somebody. They could come from the Eagles. They could beat Dallas. So I think that's by far toughest division in the NFC because I think those 3 teams are pretty good.
This is not and sometimes serious bettors don't like points like this because they want information. They want like facts. They want real data. They don't want kind of these more anecdotal, subjective things. But as a bettor looking at them, one of the things that you can't quantify that worries me about Philadelphia is how do they respond to having a bullseye on them this year?
No.
We haven't seen that yet. I mean, last year, a lot of people in our shoes before the season made similar points. If Hurts can make that jump, look at the roster around him. They were a very popular pick to go over their win total and win the NFC. A lot of sports books lost money on Philadelphia getting to the Super Bowl last year.
Once that happened, it became like the trendy
This is
pick.
going to say whether they are a great team or they are a team that we're going to be talking about for years to come.
But it was Green Bay. It was Tampa Bay with Brady back. It was can the Rams repeat? There's always that Cowboys.
Yeah.
So now they're a storyline. How do they handle being a storyline?
Right. And I think you made a good point about Hurts and his disposition and his attitude and his mentality, I think, is all fair.
He also got paid, too.
He got paid.
He got paid.
But,
he balled out because he had that.
There's turnover with both coordinators.
Yeah.
And the defensive coordinator change and the defensive personnel change, I think, is going to be the one thing that might throw a monkey wrench.
Well, I also think
Eagles.
Jalen Hurts, let's remember what happened his last year at Alabama. I mean, he wasn't even the starting quarterback. He had to leave, go to Oklahoma, kind of rebuild his he was unbelievable.
I'm sold on the guy.
I love him.
Sold on Jalen Hurts, and more than that, when we're talking about
defense,
being an issue, then we'd have to write out a lot of these teams with great quarterbacks. If we're going to talk about teams, and the reason that teams are in the playoff is because of great quarterbacks, then the Eagles should very well be in that conversation still with Jalen Hurts. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, we could say the same thing about each year. Sometimes the Bengals are in that conversation. There are quarterbacks out there where their defense is lackluster, and they still get the job done. The Eagles could be one of them.
And the people that put together the power rankings, and I mean not like on a website. I mean the people in the odds makers who do it, right? They say the same thing, that it's easier for them year to year to predict offensive performance than it is defense. That's why they're going to inflate Kansas City and Philadelphia, because they trust those units. Okay, there's a better chance that they have year in, year out production. Defense can be up and down.
Defense a lot about turnovers. And turnovers aren't always I'm not saying they're lucky.
They're random.
But they can be.
The Eagles are also a team that every time they start a drive, especially at home, it's almost like they're going to score every single time. So a lot of teams play from behind on the Eagles. So I'm going to have to say I'm high on them. I really am. I think that could be the team to take the NFC yet again. When we're looking ahead to some players that are going to have a good season, we want to look at some player props. That's always fun, right? One player, one prop that you like heading into the season. Craig, what's yours and why?
There's a lot of them out there that this can get dangerous. And be careful if you're betting futures because you're tying your money up. And same way with betting futures as players, to win your, defensive player of the year, offensive player of the year. I like Kirk Cousins to go over, to lead the league in passing. I think they're going to be behind a lot of games this year. And to me, that's what you want if you're going to lead the league in passing. Yeah. Usually the league in passing, you're either, an unbelievable offense like the Chiefs have been, or you're a team, like the Lions last year that were down in every game, and so they were throwing the ball around a lot. To me, I think this year you lose Dalvin Cook. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball as much. I think it's a very competitive division, so they'll be in a lot of games, but I think down. So I'm going to take the Kirk Cousins bandwagon. I think maybe I fall in love with him a little bit in the quarterback, Netflix series.
Hard not to.
Yeah, it was.
What did it for you? His wardrobe, was that it?
It just you kind of saw the way he was before, and you kind of had
the memories room.
Yeah, it's like.
I think it's the campfire. I think it's that everybody was partying after Patrick Mahomes had 9 million people at his house, and Kirk Cousins is going home and having a bonfire roasting s'mores with his son.
Holes in his
He's like a family
guy,
which you kind of would expect that he would have been a family man. It's
100%.
just like I think he's setting up for a big year. I think Minnesota. I mean, he's possibly the best receiver in the game. I mean,
And possibly another one rising with Jordan Addison. And on top of that, they give away Dalvin Cook. Now they're going to have to rely on putting together a perfect passing game coming into this. So Hawkinson's there as well, a great guy to rely on, a big body in the middle of the field. So I don't think that's completely far off. I like that. As a player prop, Pony, moving forward, one player you're high on, one prop, what would it be? What are you telling everybody out here watching what it's going to be?
Craig was right about how you could spend hours.
Yep.
Because there's so many. You have to also account when you do these, there's the injury rate too. I mean, if a guy gets hurt, they're not going to refund your money and say, hey,
donation.
We feel bad for you.
Thank you.
No, exactly. So I went through this, and I wanted to get a long shot guy too. I didn't want to just play somebody that was a favorite. And the player I came back to was Tony Pollard to lead the NFL in rushing. And the reason why I like him so much is twofold. Number one, with Elliott gone, there's no timeshare there anymore. And they didn't do anything this offseason to give Tony Pollard a change of pace back, right? So they didn't bring in Dalvin Cook. I don't think they're going to trade for Jonathan Taylor, right? So I think what you see is what you get there. The backup is Malik Davis, who no one's ever heard of. The other guy, Ronald Jones, just got in trouble and isn't going to play. I mean, it's all Pollard. And Mike McCarthy, and I don't know if I can take him at his word, but when they got rid of Kellen Moore, he said, now that I'm the head coach, it's not about how many points we score, it's winning games. And I think we need to go back to being more of a run-heavy team, which I think Jerry Jones is okay with because they've invested so much in their offensive line. So it's a guy that averaged over 5 yards per carry. Can he withstand the workload? That's anyone's guess. But when I look at the running backs that are at the top of the list here, some of them have backups that are going to eat at carries. I just think Tony Pollard at like 18-1.
I think people were drafting him very highly in fantasy as well. I've seen a lot of fantasy drafts happening, but a guy that I think should be on your fantasy list, maybe for a quarterback. My favorite player prop heading into this season, and I know everybody's going to say, oh, of course, because of Hard Knocks, because of what's going on. No, Aaron Rodgers, most regular season passing yards in the AFC East. Yes, I think he's going to finish above Josh Allen, to my earlier point about the Bills. The reason being, Josh Allen only finished, and this is going to seem like a big number, but when we're talking about guys like Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers and the caliber of quarterback they are, Josh Allen only finished 558 yards above Aaron Rodgers in passing last year, and that was with Aaron Rodgers in the disaster that Green Bay was, and what we felt like when Aaron Rodgers was on the field, he wasn't calling the shots. The Jets brought him in to pass the ball. You bring in a guy like Aaron Rodgers to utilize his arm in the best way possible. Now, I know the Jets have a great running back room. I know they do, but I just don't think you bring in Aaron Rodgers to rely on that run. I don't even think they predicted, obviously no one predicted Dalvin Cook would be a part of their running back room. So I think a lot of this offense is going to be tailored toward Aaron Rodgers. He's going to be able to put in a position where he's on the field making the throws that he wants to make. He's not going to be afraid to throw the ball down the field, especially if he has Garrett Wilson sitting out there or a guy like Lazard or Cobb that he was already comfortable with in Green Bay. I'm going to go ahead and say Aaron Rodgers, most regular season passing yards for a good bit of plus money value in that AFC East division.
The Tua's, I think, the actually threat there, if he stays healthy. Because Tua in the games, I mean, remember the start he had last year before the concussions?
Yeah, the highest passer rating in the league.
Right. I mean, if he stays healthy, can avoid the concussions, which let's just hope he can, because I mean, that Miami team could be dangerous, and that offense could be good. That would be the threat. I think bigger than the Bills, because like we said earlier, I think the Bills have issues. You just can't rely on one or two guys anymore. You got to be able to spread the ball around, and I think that's
the one nitpicky thing I'm going to say about Hannah's sell job there on Rodgers is that she said he's not going to be afraid to throw the ball downfield. He might be with that offensive line. And that, to me, is the one area with that team that could completely blow up everything else they've built by bringing Aaron Rodgers in there. They, frankly, neglected the offensive line in the offseason. And they're adding nice toys and shiny objects like Dalvin Cook. But if you can't protect a 39-year-old quarterback, we saw it last year with Matt Ryan in Indianapolis. That experiment blew up because he couldn't move around anymore. And Aaron Rodgers said something on Instagram about getting offensive linemen there. I think the Jets are the best team in the AFC East. I could see Rodgers and Wilson putting up huge numbers together, but in the back of my mind, Hannah, I'm very concerned
They might have to run
As
the
you,
ball.
as you
Offensive
can
line.
be, absolutely. The offensive line is the glaring issue there. But let's say it does pan together a little bit. I will still rely on Aaron Rodgers as an experienced quarterback to get the ball out of his hands fast and trust his receivers downfield because of his ability to place the ball where he'd like.
Well, it's been proven that I think with I think offensive line play, pass blocking, I think has a lot more to do with quarterbacks than say run blocking has to do with
Joe Burrow's passing
running
yards
backs.
haven't been stinted that much, despite the fact that he's been hurt. He's been hit over and over and over again because of the glaring issues with their offensive line here and there. So we can make that same argument.
Is like they will be able to run the ball enough to play action pass because Rodgers is a great play action pass guy, and they were always a great screen guy. So you get the ball, short passes end up long runs sometimes. They're just an extended handoff.
The other thing you've got to worry about is they better not get frustrated by the way they start the season because they've got a really tough schedule for the first 5 or 6 weeks. And we know how the New York media can get and stuff. And
we know how Aaron Rodgers is with the media.
Exactly. It's how persnickety and weird he is, frankly. So if they can kind of just tread water for those first 5 or 6 games, then I think they can have a tremendous year. But they can't let like a 2-4 start or something like that.
Picks and Parlays, Bettors Edge, Andrew Fillipponi, Craig Trapp, Hannah Mears. We're here on a weekly basis. Tune in with us every Thursday for our NFL picks. Hopefully our futures pan out. TBD at the end of the season. We'll see how good we were looking into that crystal ball. Thanks so much for tuning in with us, and best of luck.